Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Martial Universe Season 6 based on novel. So let's start. Haha, you seem very surprised. The transformed little Martin laughed dryly while looking shyly at Lin Dong, whose face looked dumbstruck. The shock in Lin Dong's mind lasted for a moment, before disappearing gradually. He stared oddly at little Martin and then, a tinge of eccentric smiling expression appeared in his eyes. Lad, what kind of expression is that? Even though Grandpa Martin is considered a youth in the celestial demon Martin tribe, the number of years that I have lived is still more than you. There's no loss for you to call me Grandpa Martin. Little Martin could not help, but said promptly, when he saw Lin Dong's mocking smile. Lin Dong gave a chuckle and ignored him. Upon seeing this, little Martin felt the urge to roll his eyes. He knew that once his human form was revealed, the astute and rigorous image that he built painstakingly for Lin Dong would be completely ruined. It seems like my hunch was right. Lin Dong stretched his back and stared smilingly at little Martin, who had a gloomy face. Sometimes, from little Martin's tone, Lin Dong could sense that even though little Martin had more experience than him, he still lacked the venerable aura of an old man, who had experienced various hardships in life. Since you have now recovered your physical body, what do you plan to do next? Lin Dong changed the topic and asked. What's there for me to do? I will first follow you around. Even though I have recovered my physical body, I still need a long time to regain the powers that I have in my peak form. Little Martin thought for a while, before shooting a glance at Lin Dong and continued, furthermore, a person like you stirs troubles everywhere you go. If Grandpa Martin leaves you, I'm afraid I will have to return and collect your corpse in a few days' time. Lin Dong was unconcerned with regards to such regularly used comments from little Martin. As he looked at this fellow, who was even more devilish handsome than the great Yang Empire's prince, Mo Ling, a tinge of warmth flashed across his heart. Lin Dong knew that little Martin did not want leave, because he is worried about Lin Dong traveling alone in the eastern Xian region. After pursing his lips, Lin Dong held out his hand and patted little Martin lightly on his shoulders and said softly, brother. Both of them acquainted with each other at their lowest moment. After traveling together for the past few years, their relationship had indeed deepened. Little Martin quickly shook off Lin Dong's hand. Then, he turned his head to one side and swore, lad, can you not do this kind of thing, it's so corny. Lin Dong chuckled and then muttered, after we leave this place, as long as we are in the eastern Xian region, and not in any critical situation, don't reveal your identity as a celestial demon Martin. I think that given your capabilities, even if you have not recovered 1/10 of the powers you have in your peak form, as long as you try your best to hide your identity, not many people can recognize who you really are. Most of the celestial demon Martin's powers depend on that body. If I don't use that body, my powers will be reduced even further. Little Martin folded his eyebrows and replied. That's still better than attracting those super sects, which have a grudge against the celestial demon Martin tribe. Don't worry, there is still me and Little Flame. It's not an easy task to force us into that kind of dire straits, Lin Dong reassured. Upon hearing what was said, little Martin could only shake his head helplessly. He also understood that even if he could return to his peak form now, it was impossible for him to travel without the slightest scruple in the eastern Xian region. On this piece of vast and boundless land, there were numerous terrifyingly powerful entities. Those super sects were able to establish themselves successfully on this piece of vast land for thousands of hundreds of years, and even disputed with numerous races from the demon city at the same time. That kind of mightiness could not be described by words easily. Lin Dong was satisfied when he saw little Martin nod his head in agreement. Lin Dong was not interested in investigating the issue of what conflicts that the celestial demon Martin tribe had with some of the super sects in eastern Xian region. All he knew was that little Martin was his brother. It appears that if we are to enter those super sects in the future, we must find one that has no grudges against the celestial demon Martin tribe. Otherwise, we will be in for some trouble. As this thought came across Lin Dong's mind, he suddenly thought of the mysterious old man whom he met earlier. That old man should be a member of a super sect, and it seemed that they had no grudges against the celestial demon Martin tribe. The only issue was that he did not know which super sect that old man belonged to. Otherwise, that super sect would be a good choice for them as well. Let's go. Flinging his head, Lin Dong tossed out the numerous thoughts in his head. The time they spent in this dimension had not been short. It seemed that the situation in the ancient battlefield now was getting considerably volatile. That was because the real 100 Empire War was starting soon. After nearly 1 year of various silent and arduous training, those practitioners, who usually concealed themselves from the public, were about to display their sharp canine teeth, and became dazzling entities in this ancient battlefield. Just like how great tides could be used to wash away the sand to reveal diamonds and gold, no matter how well a talent was hidden, through layer and layer of elimination in the competition, he or she would eventually rise above the others and shock the world. Once again, the rustic ancient secret key appeared in Lin Dong's palm. Soon after, numerous beams of dazzling light were given out, and the space in front of them emitted violent energy waves. Indistinctly, a vortex was forming gradually. As the vortex began to form, Lin Dong took a sweeping glance at this dimension and a quick one at that flowing Pill River. This place was indeed a precious training ground for Nirvana practitioners. However, it was a pity that he could not stay here forever. After feeling slightly emotional, Lin Dong decided not to delay anymore and took a step forward into that slow swirling vortex. Behind him, little Martin also promptly caught up with him. Buzz. As both of them stepped into the vortex began to spin rapidly. Finally, under a series of undulation of space, the vortex disappeared. After the vortex disappeared, this unused dimension became silent once again, and awaited the next fated individual's arrival. However, by then, it was clear that there was no one who could earn Qingji's inheritance like what Lin Dong had done. Meanwhile, as Lin Dong and little Martin stepped into the vortex and left the depths of Green Dragon Temple, at another dimension, a muscular figure seated on a mountain of corpses slowly opened his tightly shut eyes. Boom. As that figure opened his eyes, scarlet glow gushed out of them. An indescribable fiendish aura swept out from his body like hurricane. Cold-blooded, savage. That kind of terrifying fiendish aura was enough to make mentally weak individuals to tremble with terror. Under the gaze from those scarlet eyes, one's fighting capabilities would decrease significantly. That giant-like, seated figure was naturally Little Flame. Right now, there were numerous unsightly and striking scars intertwined all over his body. It was hard to imagine what kind of intense and devastating fightings he had experienced in this dimension. As the brutal aura swept out from Little Flame, a sky-high blood mist were gathering above his head as well. Indistinctly, that blood mist seemed to have become an enormous, blood-red glowing tiger. Roar! The blood-red glowing tiger roared towards the sky, and that tiger roar resounded frantically through the air. That kind of tiger roar was extremely bizarre, and it was able to make the blood in one's body to boil agitatedly. It appeared that under this kind of tiger roar, one's blood would burst out of his or her body involuntarily. The current Little Flame was remarkably alike to a Terminator. Little Flame raised his head. He then stared emotionlessly at the blood-red glowing tiger with his scarlet eyes. Following which, he opened his huge mouth and an absorbing power gushed out from within and swallowed the entire blood-red glowing tiger. After swallowing the blood-red glowing tiger, the scarlet glow around Little Flame's body seemed to become denser. Soon after, he slowly stood up and looked at the empty dimension with his scarlet eyes. Then, as if he sensed something, the scarlet glow in his eyes disappeared like receding tides, and was replaced with a tinge of happiness. His big brother came out of seclusion. Little Flame muttered joyfully. That kind of facial expression was totally different from the previous emotionless one. Then, with a grasp of his hand, the ancient secret key appeared. The training he had in this place had already reached its limit. The reason why he never left this place was because he was waiting for Lin Dong's news. Right now, since Lin Dong had already came out of seclusion, Little Flame naturally knew that it was time to leave this place. Little Flame straightened his back and took a sweeping glance at the reddish, devastation-filled, battlefield-like dimension. Following which, he shot a glance at the intertwining scars on his body and grinned. He took a step forward and walked into the swirling vortex, and left this place. As Little Flame's figure disappeared into the vortex, the fiendish aura that pervaded the battlefield-like dimension reduced in an instant. It appeared that the fiendish aura from Little Flame had pervaded the entire battlefield-like dimension. Buzz. After that vortex disappeared, the space nearby began to distort slightly and an elderly figure appeared. It was the mysterious old man whom Lin Dong met earlier. At this moment, that mysterious old man looked at the spot where Little Flame disappeared into, and used his wizened hand to stroke his beard. His eyes seemed to contain an unconcealable tinge of amazement. The White Tiger Temple is widely known to be brutal and murderous. Any ordinary individual who obtains its inheritance will immediately become a bloodthirsty killing machine. I didn't expect this big fellow to be able to display such perfect dominance and control over this dimension. Simply amazing. After the mysterious old man finished his sentence, he then smiled gently and muttered again, "That friend of Lin Dong seems complicated as well. This time around, there's going to be a great show in the 100 Empire War. I'm not sure how far they can progress. Those super sects of Wilders are no pushovers." After he finished his sentence silently, the mysterious old man brandished the sleeves of his robe and oddly disappeared once again. Being the symbolic city within the northwestern region, this ancient hall was quite a lively one. Moreover, ever since the appearance of the ancient treasure trove, the human traffic in this place had reached a pretty terrifying level. Even after many months, this place was still considered to be flourishing. The ancient treasure trove was opened for quite a while. Hence, quite a number of people continuously entered during this later period of time. Of course, there were also some people who had obtained some treasures, continuously exiting it with wild joy. Quite a number of people felt provoked upon seeing the kind of envious rewards obtained. Furthermore, with the 100 Empire War looming closer and closer, many experts were anxious to increase their strength. Hence, the number of people who entered the ancient treasure trove increased with the flow of time. Similarly, the number of experts that were attracted to this ancient hall also crazily increased. Various high-ranked empires swarmed over to this place, packing it to the extent that even water would have difficulty seeping out. Disputes would naturally follow with an increase in the number of people. This was a principle that would never change. With an increasing number of people surging into the ancient treasure trove, the treasure trove would not be able to endure this kind of harvesting regardless of how rich the treasure trove was. Hence, after 2 months or so, most of the treasures and inheritance within the ancient treasure trove have been obtained by others. In this way, it also resulted in others having no choice but to return empty-handed. Most of those who arrived in this place were unwilling to return empty-handed. Therefore, a problem had occurred. Since they were no longer able to obtain any treasures, they could only snatch them. This was a place where strength was honored. As long as one possessed sufficient strength, no one would blame one for robbing another. The birth of these thoughts had basically caused this ancient hall city to become chaotic overnight. Those people who had returned from the ancient treasure trove with great rewards did not have any time to revel in their spoils after exiting the spatial ripple, when they sensed that they were already the focus of numerous greedy blood-red eyes. Snatching and resistance. Such events occurred in every part of the city. There were those which were small-scale, while there was no lacking of large ones as well. In any case, everyone was aware that one could not be considered to have completely succeeded after obtaining the treasures. This was because they must possess the ability to bring these treasures out from this ancient hall in front of the many malicious gazes. There was no order in this place. Only one strength and fist existed. Of course, regardless of how chaotic the place was, there was ultimately a difference between the strong and the weak. After the many shuffling of power within this ancient hall, the factions that had dominated this place in the past had long been swept away. When one walked in this enormous ancient city, one would definitely gather at the middle of the gold-colored hall. When one raised his head, that spot was the most attention-seeking spot in the entire city. It is reputed that the faction, which was currently occupying this gold-colored large hall, was powerful enough to tower over the entire city, until no one dared speak back. They were not from a high-ranked empire. Instead, a super-empire. These three words did not appear gentle. Instead, it contained a heaviness that would cause one's expression to change. The northwestern region was filled with countless number of empires, and they were just like the stars in the sky. Counting all of them was impossible. However, everyone knew that amongst these numerous star-like empires, there are an extremely small number of them which stood at the peak. Those were the super-empires. It was impossible for an ordinary empire to measure the strength of a super-empire. In this northwestern region, if one was to describe a super-sect as the king, these super-empires would be like the overlords. Although the strength and foundation of these super-empires were lacking compared to those super-sects, their strength was also at a level that one could not underestimate. Those geniuses that had come out from those super-empires not only had talents that an ordinary person had difficulty being compared with, but their foundation was also something that an ordinary person could not compare with. The moment that they entered this ancient battlefield, they were already at the peak. From a certain point of view, it was basically a given that they would be chosen to join the super-sects. Hence, the super-empires were the strongest existence in this ancient battlefield. Wherever they went, no other empire dared to offend them. This was because everyone understood that they could not offend the super-empires, given the latter's strength. Originally, there were no super-empires that existed in this northwestern region. These super-empires in the ancient hall had arrived after the ancient treasure trove appeared. From their appearance, it seemed that they were interested in the ancient treasure trove. However, everyone were a little uncertain as to why this super-empire did not attack and snatch the treasures of others like they had expected after having forcefully occupied that gold-colored hall. Instead, they remained quiet. Their manner appeared as though they were waiting for something. Their actions caused people to feel a little uncertain. However, there was soon some news that began to spread. These people from the super sect was indeed waiting here, because of the ancient treasure trove. However, they had quite a high standard. Ordinary treasure naturally had difficulty catching their attention. What they wanted was the four great mysterious sects' inheritance in the ancient treasure trove. Based on the news that had been transmitted from the ancient treasure trove, the inheritance of the four great mysterious sects had already been obtained by Liu Bai's, Lin Sen's and Lin Dong's group. Moreover, the most shocking thing was that the seemingly weakest Lin Dong's group had actually monopolized two of the great mysterious sects' inheritance. There was an even more shocking news that spread after this news. During the fight for the inheritance, Lin Dong had actually defeated Tianjin, Mu Shou and Jiang Shan, three of the overlords of the northwestern region. He established his might and directly took two of the great mysterious sects' inheritance. Regardless of how many people scoffed when this news was spread, the entire city seemed to have become silent after Tianjin and the two others came out from the ancient treasure trove in a dispirited manner. Quite a number of people quietly inhaled a breath of cold air. They were really unable to imagine that a person from a low-rank empire was actually able to reach such a frightening level. No matter what kind of enormous commotion that was stirred in the ancient hall, or even the northwestern region, however, his actual self had ultimately not appeared. This had given credence to the news that he was refining the mysterious sex inheritance. After everyone became aware of the intention of this super empire in coming to this ancient hall, quite a number of people ended up gloating a little. They really wanted to see just what kind of performance Lin Dong, who had been continuously performing miracles, would be able to display in front of such terrifying opponents. 1 month ago, while they were waiting with such an intention, an unusual activity had appeared in the space of the ancient hall. After which, Liu Bai's and Sen Yang's group actually directly broke out of the space in front of the focus of the entire city. This group of people had just appeared when it immediately stirred the attention of the super empire, which was present in the gold-colored large hall. At the same time, some super empire's experts revealed themselves. However, everyone was a little surprised to find that the big battle, which they had anticipated, did not appear. Both parties had an intense face-off for a moment before both parties felt a little wary of each other. After which, the super empire actually gave up and returned. Quite a number of people were a little stunned in the face of this situation. Only those who were well informed were aware that although the super empire had arrived at the ancient hall, Liu Bai and Yang Sen also possessed quite a strong background behind them. It was likely that the super empire had weighed the situation a little, before deciding that they did not wish to end up with a conflict with the factions behind these two just because of this inheritance. Some people were a little disappointed over this result. Soon after, however, they braced their attention once again. This was because they understood that although both parties did not fight this time around, there would not be such an anticlimax the next time around. Liu Bai and Yang Sen possessed quite a strong background, but Lin Dong had came from a low-ranked empire. Hence, no super empires backed him. Therefore, as long as he dared to reveal himself, it was likely that he would have to obediently hand over the inheritance. This was because the one which attacked him this time around was a super empire. In this ancient battlefield, the prestige of a super empire was definitely not something that someone who had originated from a low-rank empire would dare to provoke. Even though he had performed many miracles, the strength of a super sect was already sufficient to eliminate any miracles. Great Gan Empire. This was the super sect which was present in this ancient hall. It was a name that could cause the hearts of many to tremble in fear even in this entire ancient battlefield. The Great Gan Empire had 3 kings and 4 generals. All of these people were renowned individuals on the Nirvana ranking. Their strength had already reached quite a terrifying level. At this moment, 2 of the 4 generals from this Great Gan Empires were quietly waiting in this ancient hall for the appearance of Lin Dong. Fire General, Zhu Tianhua. Mountain General, Mu Huang. 2 great individuals who had once shaken the ancient battlefield. They were the true genius and elites in this ancient battlefield. Countless number of people in the ancient hall were all anxiously anticipating the fight that would erupt soon. This was because all of them wanted to know whether this young man, from a low-rank empire, would be able to continue creating his miracles in the face of such true great beings. The end of the miracles, or the miracles becoming even brighter. The answer would likely be revealed very soon. Countless number of people thought in this manner within the ancient hall. A moment later, they suddenly raised their heads and looked at the spatial swirl that had suddenly appeared in the space. All of them were stunned for a moment. The spatial swirl was slowly formed as a wild and violent ripple spread from it. After which, two young familiar-looking figures gradually appeared from within the swirl. The eyes of some sharp-eyed individuals suddenly shrunk tightly upon seeing the figure that was the leader. Soon after, sharp, uncontrolled, joyous voice sounded in an ear-piercing manner. Lin Dong has appeared. A large gold hall. The interior of the large hall was covered by a brilliant golden luster. It was grand and majestic. At this moment, a couple of figures were seated within the large hall. Meanwhile, the atmosphere was stern and sharp. Two figures were seated on a throne at the front of the large hall. One could vaguely see a shocking ripple slowly spreading from both of their bodies. The one who was seated on the left of the throne was wearing crimson clothes. His hair was also completely fiery red, appearing just like a cluster of fiercely burning flames. There were two fiery red beads slowly rotating in his hand. His casual-looking face and his lazy stance caused him to be out of tune with the stern atmosphere within the large hall. However, no one dared to reprimand him. Seated on his left was a strong man with a huge body. The man was completely expressionless, and he appeared just like a mountain when he sat on the throne. A heavy aura that had difficulty being hidden spread around his body. Tianjin, we have already waited in this place for nearly 2 months. The 100 Empire War is about to begin soon. You should know that we do not have much time to waste in this place. The grey-clothed strong man's eyes looked at a figure at the middle of the large hall in an indifferent manner. His voice was like a roar, causing the entire hall to shake a little. If one was to shift one's eyes downwards, one would see that there was a familiar figure standing at the middle of the large hall. It belonged to Tianjin, who had some grudges with Lin Dong back then. However, this person, who was once an overlord of this northwestern region, had a modest expression in front of these two people. Big brother Mu Huang, that Lin Dong must have definitely obtained news of your arrival. Therefore, he has purposefully hid himself. If we choose to withdraw now, we might end up doing what he wanted. Moreover, we would have also wasted 2 months waiting. The smile that was worn on Tianjin's face carried a fawning feeling as he hurried said. I am also aware that Big Brother Mu Huang and Big Brother Tian Hua needs to prepare for the subsequent 100 Empire War. However, Lin Dong has obtained 2 of the 4 great mysterious sects' inheritance. If you can finish him off, the inheritance would land in the hands of big brothers. At that time, your strength will increase and you will have more tactics, even when facing the opponents in that 100 Empire War. This Tianjin was indeed quite eloquent. Moreover, he also clearly understood the things could attract the two in front of him, who had extremely high expectations. Therefore, after he spoke those words, even the seemingly casual red-robed man paused the rotating bright red beads in his hands. He stared at Tianjin and smilingly said, You really can say everything you want with this mouth of yours. However, what you have said is correct. Since we have already waited for 2 months, it doesn't matter if we have to wait for a few more days. While he spoke these words, the crimson-clothed man stretched his lazy waist and playfully said, Moreover, I also really wish to see that person who could actually defeat you 3 overlords of the northwestern region. During this period of time, I have heard of quite a number of dark horses that had appeared from various places. However, there are not many of them who could meet our expectations. Zhu Qianhua originated from a super empire, and he had an incomparably great and powerful background. Although there were some lucky individuals in this ancient battlefield who had become someone great overnight after obtaining a treasure, they were just like some upstarts in the eyes of Zhu Qianhua. In fact, he had finished off quite a number of dark horses that had suddenly appeared during this period. Big brother Qianhua, this Lin Dong is indeed very troublesome to deal with. If it is not because the news is accurate, I would not believe that he came from a low-ranked empire like the Great Yang Empire, Tianjin uttered gravely. In that case, I must really meet him. Zhu Qianhua parted the corner of his mouth. His smile had a densely cold feeling to it. Tianjin's entire body became chilly upon seeing his smile. He did not dare to say anything else. He knew that despite this Zhu Tianhua's casual manner, he had quite an erratic character. Moreover, he hated those who relied on treasures and inheritance to advance quickly to the top. An unknown number of these so-called dark horses have already died in this person's hands during this period of time. Mu Huang, who was still in the throne at the side, suddenly leaned forward a little. His gaze looked towards the sky outside of the hall. A smile slowly appeared on that indifferent face. It seems that the prey has appeared. Zhu Tianhua also felt a little startled at the same time. The playful grin on the corner of his mouth suddenly became denser. He immediately stood up and directly headed out of the large hall. While his feet walked, a mighty yuan power also surged out from his body like floodwaters. The muscular-looking man behind Zhu Tianhua also stood up and slowly followed. Is he finally willing to show himself? Tianjin also understood something after watching the back of these two. A ferocious smile immediately surged up onto his face. He wanted to see whether Lin Dong would still be as arrogant as he was back then in the face of the current situation. Tianjin felt a surge of joy in his heart the moment he thought of Lin Dong's miserable manner. After which, he swiftly turned his body and followed. He knew that from today onwards, the miracles of Lin Dong would likely come to an end. Due to the sudden appearance of the spatial spiral, the entire ancient hall had turned into an uproar. Countless number of gazes containing various emotions shot over at this moment. Those gazes were filled with curiosity, greed and gloating emotions. This was because they knew just who was coming out from that spot, and was also aware of just what kind of encounter the people who appeared would have. Many people waited at this ancient hall. One of the main reason was because they were waiting for the arrival of this day. The rotating spatial swirl slowly stilled in front of the countless number of gazes. After which, two figures surfaced from within it and eventually appeared in front of everyone's sight. At this instant, the entire city appeared to have become instantly silent. The strange atmosphere within the city had similarly caused the two, who had just exited the spatial swirl, to be startled. Immediately, Lin Dong knitted his eyebrows slightly. Little Martin's handsome face behind him drew a gloating smile. Looks like there is always trouble no matter where you go. Lin Dong could not be bothered with little Martin jest. He lowered his head and looked at the black masses of human heads in this city. His eyes sunk slightly, but there was little ripple in his voice. It seems that we are being targeted. You and Little Flame have obtained 2 of the 4 great mysterious sex inheritance, a haul that anyone would be envious of. Moreover, both of you don't have the background of Liu Bai's group. Would those people be fools if they did not try to squeeze a soft persimmon like you? Little Martin laughed heartlessly. It is just that I don't know what kind of great being is trying to pinch me, this soft persimmon, this time around. Lin Dong chuckled. Although he spoke these words with his mouth, his eyes were thrown towards the most glaring gold-colored hall in the entire city. He felt 2 extremely powerful aura from that spot. That kind of aura even stronger when compared with a 3 yuan nirvana stage expert. It looks like these people have the ability to attempt the 4th nirvana tribulation. They are really quite powerful, and I think that they should be members of the so-called Nirvana ranking, Little Martin laughed. However, his face did not reveal the slightest seriousness. Along his with current recovery, the domineering aura of the celestial demon Martin had once again flowed out from his bones. Even though Lin Dong forbade him from lightly using the strength of the celestial demon Martin, it was still not a difficult task for him to deal with such individuals. We have indeed met some great beings. Lin Dong nodded. This kind of great being was already sufficiently qualified to advance into the Nirvana ranking. If Lin Dong was to meet such an expert, before he entered this ancient treasure trove, he might perhaps only be able to hide temporarily. However, right now, Lin Dong and little Martin were suspended in the mid-air. They smiled at each other, but did not show any signs of leaving immediately. This caused quite a number of people in the city to lift their eyebrows quietly. However, they let out a cold laughter soon after. If these two fellows knew just what kind of people their opponents were this time around, it was likely that their expressions would turn quite ugly. Ha ha, you can still laugh despite great enemies approaching. The courage of the both of you have somewhat exceeded my expectations. When all the gazes in this city were focused on the two figures in the sky, a casual laughter finally resounded over the place. After which, everyone saw two figures walking out from the gold-colored hall. They took one step at a time on the empty space as they leisurely walked out. A commotion was stirred within the city the moment these two figures appeared. Clearly, their reputation was extremely well known to these people. Lin Dong watched the figures that slowly walked over across the air. The person in front of wearing crimson clothes. His fiery red hair was also quite eye-catching. A playful smile was hung on his face. Behind him was an indifferent-looking person with an aura that was filled with pressure. Zhu Qianhua turned his head towards Lin Dong and smilingly introduced, Great Gan Empire, Fire General Zhu Qianhua. Mountain General, Mu Huang. The strongman voice was a loud roar, appearing just like a thunder. Great Yang Empire, Lin Dong. Lin Dong spread his hand. He ignored the extremely pressurizing attitude and demeanor of these two. We have waited for you for a long time. The smile on Zhu Qianhua's face was very warm. He stared at Lin Dong and seriously said, We have our eyes on the inheritance of the four great mysterious sects. Why don't you hand them over to us? Lin Dong turned his head and glanced at little Martin. The latter parted his mouth into a smile and commented, It seems that they are even more arrogant than me. Lin Dong shook his head snappily. After which, he looked at Zhu Qianhua. He used a similar courteous tone as he uttered, If you turn around and leave now, I will not mind your attitude. What do you say? Zhu Qianhua rubbed his nose. The smile on his face was brilliant, but his eyes had become dark and solemn at that moment. Say again. My big brother has asked all of you to get lost now. The space behind Lin Dong suddenly crumbled as the spatial swirl stilled. Suddenly, a monstrous and fierce aura swept out. At this moment, it was as though the entire area had become blood red. A low and deep voice that appeared to have been transmitted from the lands of the demons was emitted from within the swirl. It was permeated with killing intent, causing the expressions of countless number of people to change as a result. A fierceness swept out from within the spatial swirl and permeated the entire place. The temperature seemed to have become icy cold at this moment. Many gazers within the ancient hall were slightly stunned when they looked towards the spatial swirl that opened up once again. Clearly, they were shocked by the terrifying fierce aura that had suddenly appeared. The eyes of Zhu Qianhua and Mu Huang also elated at this moment. They immediately looked at the spatial swirl, while the playful expression on their faces from earlier was reduced slightly. Being in possession of such an aura, it was likely that this person was not like those upstart dark horses whom they have met before, who had become strong overnight by relying on treasures. An extremely strong figure slowly surfaced from within the spatial swirl, under the focus of countless number of gazes. After which, the figure walked forward and appeared in front of everyone while being accompanied by a fierce aura that permeated around it. The body of the strong giant-like figure was covered with glaring scars. They crossed each other like numerous climbing centipedes. A black-colored metal rod was being supported on his shoulders, causing him to appear like a mountain-moving demon that had originated from ancient times. His aura was frightening. The body of that mountain general Mu Huang was already quite dazzling. However, in the face of this giant-like body, he seemed somewhat insignificant. Little Flame. Lin Dong was initially startled as he watched this strong figure that had stepped forward. A joyful expression immediately surged within his eyes. This figure was naturally Little Flame, who had exited from his retreat in the White Tiger Hall. After 4 months of harsh bitter training, Little Flame's aura had already become quite terrifying. This kind of fierceness caused even Lin Dong to feel a little fearful. He really did not know just what kind of harsh training Little Flame had underwent during this period of time. Big Brother. The scarlet color in Little Flame's blood-red wild beast-like eyes disappeared like a torrent when his gaze swept onto Lin Dong. A silly smile appeared on the fierce face, completely destroying the fierce atmosphere that was created earlier. Some of the sharp-eyed individuals swept their gazes over Lin Dong and Little Flame with some surprise upon seeing this scene. Clearly, it was unexpected that this fellow who appeared like a fierce beast from the ancient times would actually reveal such a silly appearance in front of Lin Dong. Little Martin by the side crossed his arms over his chest, as his gaze looked at Little Flame with great interest. He smilingly said, "He, it seems that this fellow had gained quite a bit during this period of time. Second brother, do you have a physical body now?" Little Flame turned his attention towards Little Martin, before he parted his mouth and smiled. Although it was the first time that he had seen Little Martin in this form, he was still able to sense a familiar scent from the latter through his sharp senses. Little Martin nodded lazily. Soon after, he suddenly recalled something and his expression immediately changed. He spoke angrily, "What nonsense, second brother. I am the big brother. Grandpa Martin has lived for a longer time than the both of you added together." Little Flame scratched his head. After which, he grabbed the black-colored rod in his hand and spoke in an honest and upright manner. "Big brother said that you are the second brother. Therefore, you are the second brother." Little Martin's handsome face had directly turned into something like a pig's liver upon hearing this. It seemed like he was about to jump in fury. "Isn't it a little too comical to put up such a show here?" This unpleasant interruption appeared from Zhu Tianhua's mouth. At this moment, the smile on his face had already disappeared. His eyes were densely cold as he stared at Little Flame before he slowly said, "You are the first who dares to order my great Gan Empire to get lost. Then let's fight." The simple and honest look on Little Flame's face disappeared almost instantly. He did not say any unnecessary words. The metal rod in his hair emitted a whistle as it tore through the air before it directly pointed towards Zhu Tianhua. Immediately, a fierce aura once again burst out from within his body. The expression in Zhu Tianhua's group eyes sunk slowly upon seeing this. It was clear that this was the first time that they had met a person who dared to act so arrogantly in front of him. "This is not the first time that I have met people who think that they are some hotshot, just because they have obtained an inheritance. However, it is the first time I have met someone like you who acts so arrogantly." Zhu Tianhua inhaled a deep breath of air. A smile once again appeared on his face. However, this smile contained a dense killing intent. It seemed that the attitude of Lin Dong's group had already begun to infuriate this great person, who was one of the 4 generals of the Great Gan Empire. "We are members of the Great Gan Empire." That Mu Huang, who had been silent, suddenly slowly opened his mouth and spoke. His low and deep voice carried a rich pressure. Those last 3 words could be considered an existence that no one could afford to offend in this ancient battlefield. "I know. However, just these 3 words is far from enough to get us to surrender the inheritance that we have obtained with great difficulty." Lin Dong also smiled. He was aware of the pressure that these 3 words brought. At the same time, however, it was impossible for him to shrink back because of it. They had put in too much effort for this inheritance. Forget about the super empires. Even if the supersex wanted them to obediently hand over the inheritance, Lin Dong would pounce and bite them if he was pushed too far. The entire city had become much quieter at this moment. Everyone here had some skills and could naturally clearly hear the words from the sky that were not specially hidden. When they heard Lin Dong's words, quite a number of them inhaled a deep breath of cold air within their hearts. They had already heard that this fellow was afraid of nothing. However, they did not expect that Lin Dong would actually act so tough in the face of such a super empire. Humph, what hard bones! Tianjin, who was in front of the gold-colored hall, also laughed coldly as he looked at the sky. His eyes contained a rich gloating expression. He knew that the attitude of Lin Dong's group would seal their only retreat route. You will regret this. Zhu Tianhua strangely did not become furious when he heard Lin Dong's reply. Instead, he spoke in a calm manner. A smile also appeared on Mu Huang's silent face behind. This smile seemed to contain some ridicule. His large hands were slowly curled before a majestic aura suddenly swept out from within his body like a storm. Bang! Little Flame walked forward. The shadow from his large body directly covered Mu Huang. A fierce glint also flashed across his eyes, while the metal rod in his hand tore through the air and furiously smashed towards Mu Huang. Mu Huang's eyes were cold. He leaped forward and a bright golden glow instantly surged over his body. A genuine gold arm directly made a head-on contact with the metal rod. Clang! A clear sound of metal coming into contact sounded. Energy ripples that could be seen with the naked eyes immediately surged out. The surrounding air emitted an ear-piercing humming sound under that kind of pressure. A wild storm swept forth, causing little flames and Mu Huang's body to shake violently. After which, both of them actually took half a step back in unison. This scene appeared in the many eyes within the ancient hall. Immediately, the expressions of quite a number of people changed. Most of the people here had heard of the strength of Mu Huang. It is rumored that he possessed the ability to attempt the fourth nirvana tribulation. Moreover, he was a powerful person who had already advanced into the nirvana ranking. Originally, everyone thought that the result of the fight between these two would definitely be a completely one-sided one. However, they did not expect that these two were actually equal. Had Lin Dong's lineup unknowingly become this powerful? Bang! Little Flame's half a step back had just landed, when he forcefully stabilized his body. The blood glint within his eyes became even denser instead. A bloodthirsty desire for battle slowly stirred on his face. In the next instant, Little Flame's foot stomped onto the sky and actually transformed into a blood glow that shot forward. The metal rod in his hand transformed into countless number of wild and violent rod shadows. They were just like a storm that carried a shocking momentum as they covered Mu Huang. Humph! Zhu Tianhua's expression immediately turned densely cold when he saw that Little Flame had actually directly bypassed him and attacked Mu Huang. He clenched his fist and a bright red fire spear appeared. The spear shook, forming a sharp arc as it swiftly penetrated towards Little Flame's throat. Clang! However, just before Zhu Tianhua's attack was 10 feet away from Little Flame, a cold glow rushed over and actually directly hit the tip of the spear. Lin Dong's body also appeared in front of Zhu Tianhua at the same time. Allow me to be your opponent. You should not interfere in their battle. Lin Dong held the heavenly crocodile bone spear in his hand and softly spoke. He smilingly looked at Zhu Tianhua, whose eyes had slowly become dark and solemn. Are you certain you have the qualifications? Zhu Tianhua stared at Lin Dong. The smile on the corner of his mouth gradually showed traces of ferocity. Lin Dong smiled. Without saying anything more, as he slowly raised the heavenly crocodile bone spear in his hand. He pointed his finger towards Zhu Tianhua in the horizon. That provocation was something that went without saying. You are a person on the Nirvana ranking. Will I possess the qualification to advance into the Nirvana ranking if I defeat you? The rage on the corner of Zhu Tianhua's mouth became increasingly dense. He no longer had the same casual appearance as before. This frightening ripple slowly spread out from his body. His sinister voice resounded over this ancient hall. You think too much. A dead person will not have any qualification. Everyone's heart was shaken when Zhu Tianhua's killing intent became denser. They knew that Zhu Tianhua would not let this matter rest today. This video will end here.